The courthouse in Milford, Indiana smelled like varnish and old tobacco, and the particular kind of silence that settles over a room just before the people in it decide you are not worth taking seriously. It was April 23rd, 1923, a Monday, the kind of spring Monday where the air outside carried the first real warmth of the season. But inside the probate chamber of Judge William Porter, the temperature stayed locked at winter cellar cold. Vera Merrick was 17 years old. She sat on a hard oak bench in the second row, wearing a gray wool dress that had belonged to a chambermaid at the Chicago hotel where she had worked for the past 2 years, and a pair of shoes she had bought for $1.25 at the train station in Indianapolis that morning. She weighed 116 pounds. She had eaten a boiled egg and a piece of brown bread on the train. She had come to Milford because a letter had reached her at the hotel, forwarded twice, telling her that her great-uncle Thaddeus Merrick had died in February and had left her being his only surviving blood relation, the following one parcel of land in the town of Milford, Orange County, Indiana. Dimensions 6 feet 8 inches by 6 feet 8 inches square, approximately 44 square feet. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, read the description twice because he did not believe it the first time. 6 feet 8 inches by 6 feet 8 inches square. That is the size of a door laid flat on the ground. That is the size of a kitchen table with the chairs pushed in. That is by any honest measure the size of a grave with a little room left over to stand beside it and pay your respects. The county assessor, the clerk added in a voice that suggested he was reading from a script he had not written and did not particularly believe had valued the parcel at $3. Vera remembered the exact moment the laughter started because she had been watching a beam of sunlight move across the floorboards when it happened. The light came in through the tall windows on the east wall, and it crept across the room at the speed of the earth turning. And she had been following its progress because it was easier than looking at the faces of the people who had come to see whether old Thaddeus Merrick had left anything worth taking. A man in a brown suit with a gold watch chain who she would learn was named Harrison Caldwell, proprietor of the Caldwell Bottling Works on Depot Street, let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh that he did not bother to cover with his hand. Then the man beside him, his foreman, a thick-shouldered man whose name Vera never learned. Then Mrs. Ivers from the boarding house who had come because Thaddeus owed her $7.40 for the last month of his life. Then the whole room, 7 or 8 people who had gathered in the probate chamber to learn whether old Thaddeus Merrick, the well driller who talked to the ground, had left behind anything worth fighting over, and who had just learned that he had left behind a plot of ground smaller than the rug in a banker's parlor. The lawyer, a thin young man named Mr. Leathers, who had drawn the short straw of handling Thaddeus's estate, cleared his throat. His face had gone red. He read the final clause of the will in a voice that got quieter with every word, as though he could make the whole thing disappear by saying it softly enough. The property shall pass to my grandniece Vera Merrick, being the only person in this family who ever asked me a question about water and waited for the answer. More laughter. Harrison Caldwell leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked under his weight. He said loud enough for the entire room to hear 44 square feet. That girl just inherited a hole in the ground. Old Thaddeus couldn't sell that plot to a dog for a place to lie down. He looked directly at Vera when he said the next part. What are you gonna do with it, girl? Charge a nickel for people to stand on it? The foreman chuckled. A wet sound like gravel shifting. Caldwell pressed his advantage. He pulled a silver money clip from the inside pocket of his jacket and laid it on the table between them with the theatrical slowness of a man who had done this before and expected to do it again. He peeled off a $10 bill. The paper made a crisp sound in the silent room. $10, he said. $10 cash. More than 3 times what the county says it is worth. You take it. You buy a ticket back to wherever you came from. And you forget about this town. He smoothed the bill flat on the table with the palm of his hand. $10. That is a week's wages for a girl your age. That is the best offer you will ever get on that piece of dirt. Vera looked at the lawyer. She looked at the paper on his desk. She looked at the little hand-drawn map that had been folded into the will. A sketch of a block in downtown Milford done in pencil, with Thaddeus's parcel marked in red ink. A tiny square wedged between the rear wall of Caldwell's bottling works on one side and the side wall of the Milford Feed and Seed on the other. 44 square feet of town. A splinter of ground between 2 buildings. She could feel every eye in the room on her. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like a hand on the back of her neck. She had felt this weight before. In the county home in Vincennes where she had spent 11 years after her mother died. In the basement kitchen of the Chicago hotel, where the cooks had laughed when she said she could lift a crate of dishes. In every room of her life, where adults had decided before she opened her mouth that she was not worth the trouble of listening to. The laughter in that courtroom was not new, but it was the last time she intended to sit still for it. I would like to see it, she said. Her voice did not shake. She had not planned for it not to shake. It simply did not. Harrison Caldwell's smile went flat at the edges. See what girl? It is a patch of weeds. There is nothing there. You can see the whole thing from across the street without getting out of a wagon. I would like to see it, Vera said again. She did not know what he heard in her voice. She was not being brave. She was being finished. Finished with the laughter. Finished with the room. Finished with being the kind of person that men in brown suits with gold watch chains felt comfortable laughing at in public. Caldwell picked up his money clip, slowly. His face had gone careful. Suit yourself, he said. $10 today. $8 tomorrow. Nothing next week. You remember I made the offer. He stood. The whole room stood with him. The hearing was over. Vera sat on the bench and watched them file out. The clerk gathered his papers. The lawyer folded the map and slid it into an envelope and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. Judge William Porter, who had sat silent through the entire proceeding, looked at her once from his bench. His face was unreadable. Then he stood and walked into his chambers and closed the door. Vera was alone in the courtroom. She opened the envelope. Inside was the map, a ring of keys, and a note in Thaddeus's handwriting on a scrap of paper that looked like it had been torn from the back of a feed catalog. Everything you need is at the lot. Start with the notebooks. Do not let Caldwell on that land for any price. Your Uncle Thaddeus. She folded the note. She put it in the pocket of her dress. She walked out of the courthouse into the spring sunlight and she did not look back. The lot was 3 blocks south and 2 blocks east of the courthouse. Vera walked, her shoes pinched. The soles were thin and she could feel every pebble in the road through the leather. The town of Milford moved around her like she was not there. Wagons in the street, women with shopping baskets, a dog sleeping in a patch of sun outside the hardware store. Nobody looked at her twice. She found the lot because she found the alley, a narrow dirt track that ran behind Depot Street, between the brick rear wall of Caldwell's bottling works on the west and the gray, clapboard side of the Milford Feed and Seed on the east. The alley was barely wide enough for a wagon. The buildings on either side blocked the sun. The ground was packed dirt and broken stone, and the whole space smelled like motor oil and damp wood and something sour that might have been old grain. There was a gap between the two buildings, a space, 6 feet 8 inches wide and 6 feet 8 inches deep, set back from the alley by a low iron fence and a small wooden gate. In the center of the space stood a structure about the size of an outhouse, a pump house, weathered gray, a tin roof gone orange with rust, a door held shut by a padlock. And beside the pump house, flush with the ground, a low square of hand-laid stone that Vera realized after a moment was the cap of a well. The pump house covered the pump. The stone cap covered the well. That was the entire property. 44 square feet of Indiana arranged around a single hole in the ground. Vera stood in the alley and looked at it. And she thought about what Harrison Caldwell had said. A hole in the ground. He had meant it as an insult. He had not realized he was telling the literal truth. Thaddeus had left her a hole in the ground. And Thaddeus had spent 40 years of his life knowing that a hole in the ground was the most valuable thing a man could own. If it went deep enough. And if it went to the right water. The padlock key was on the ring the lawyer had given her. Vera opened the gate. She opened the padlock. She opened the door of the pump house. And she stepped inside. The pump house was bigger inside than it looked from the alley, because most of it was underground. A short set of stone steps, 6 of them led down to a small stone chamber, about 5 feet square. The walls were limestone blocks fitted together without mortar. The floor was packed earth. There was a hand pump of cast iron in the center of the chamber, its handle polished smooth with use, a wooden shelf along the north wall, and on the shelf a tin box the size of a bread loaf, and beside the tin box a glass bottle sealed with wax and stoppered with a cork. The bottle had a paper label. The ink had faded, but Vera could still read the words written in Thaddeus's careful hand. For Vera. Drink this first. She sat down on the stone step. The chamber was cool. The air smelled like stone and iron and something else. Water. Deep water. The kind of smell that comes from places that have been dark and wet for longer than anyone can remember. She picked up the bottle. The glass was thick. The weight of it was solid in her hands. She broke the wax seal with her thumbnail, the way Thaddeus had taught her 9 years ago on the porch of the county home in Vincennes. She worked the cork free. It came out with a soft pop. She drank. The water was cold. The water was sweet. The water was the water from the visiting room in 1914 when she was 8 years old, and Thaddeus had come to see her and brought a bottle just like this one, and poured her a cup and told her to drink slow. She had not understood then. She had been 8. She had thought water was water. But Thaddeus had looked at her with the particular attention of a man who had found someone worth talking to, and he had said, "Most people have never drunk real water in their life. They think what comes out of their pump is the way water is supposed to taste. They do not know that the ground under their feet has better water than they will ever buy in a store. But you have to know where to look, and you have to be willing to go deep." Vera sat on the step in the stone chamber, and she drank the bottle slowly. The water tasted of depth. It tasted of patience. It tasted of something almost like iron, but not iron. Something mineral. The way a good stone is mineral when you hold it in your hand and feel the weight of time in it. When the bottle was empty, she set it down on the step beside her. She opened the tin box. Inside were 9 leather-bound notebooks. The first one dated 1883. The last one dated January of 1923. 6 weeks before Thaddeus died. 40 years of measurements, depths, water chemistry, seasonal flow rates. Every well Thaddeus had ever drilled in 3 counties. Every test he had ever run. Every comparison he had ever made between what people expected from the ground and what the ground actually gave them, if you asked the right questions. And folded into the 9th notebook, a single typed letter on the letterhead of the Indiana Geological Survey, dated November 14th, 1919. Vera read it 3 times before she believed it. "Mr. Merrick, thank you for the water sample submitted from your well on the Milford property. Our laboratory analysis confirms that the sample is of exceptional purity, with a mineral profile comparable to the finest commercial spring waters of the Midwest. The dissolved calcium and magnesium levels are within the range typical of artesian waters originating in deep Ordovician limestone formations, which in this region lie between 250 and 300 feet below surface. We are not aware of any other well in Orange County drawing from this formation. The commercial value of water of this quality, if properly developed, would be considerable. Respectfully, Dr. James Whitcomb, Chief Geologist, Indiana. Geological Survey." Vera sat on the step and read the letter again. She opened the first notebook. The pages were yellowed. The ink had faded to brown. But the handwriting was Thaddeus's. Careful. Precise. The hand of a man who believed that if you wrote something down, you were making a promise to whoever read it later that what you wrote was true. The first entry was dated May 3rd, 1883. Purchased lot on Depot Street. 6 feet 8 inches by 6 feet 8 inches. Between Caldwell Bottling and Miller's Feed. Price $4. Reason nobody else wants it. And I need a place nobody is watching. The next entry was dated May 15th, 1883. Started drilling. Cable tool rig. Built it myself from plans in the Popular Mechanics. Down 6 feet. Hit limestone. Good sign. The entries marched down the page, day after day, week after week. Down through the soil. Down through the limestone. Down through a layer of shale that stopped most drillers in the county because the drilling got hard and the water below the shale might be bad. Thaddeus went through the shale. September 9th, 1883. Through the shale at 140 feet. Casing holding. Limestone again below. Different limestone. Older. The kind that laid down when this whole place was ocean floor. Going deeper. December 18th, 1883. 240 feet. Hit resistance. Not rock. Water. Under pressure. Casing is filling. Tomorrow I will see if it keeps rising. December 19th, 1883. Water rose overnight. 30 feet up the casing. Artesian. Temperature 51 degrees. Tastes clean. Mineral content will test. I think I have found what I was looking for. February 2nd, 1884. Final depth 271 feet. Flow rate 3.5 gallons per minute. Constant. Temperature 51 degrees. Does not vary with season. This is the deepest well in Orange County. Maybe the deepest in 3 counties. And the water is the best I have ever tasted. Vera turned the pages. The notebooks were full. 40 years full. Tests. Measurements. Comparisons. Thaddeus had drunk from the well every day of his life after he drilled it. He had bottled the water in glass jars and given it away to people in town who were sick, or who had babies, or who just asked him for it. He had written to the Indiana Geological Survey. He had tried in his quiet way to tell people what was under the ground they walked on, and nobody had listened, because Thaddeus was a well driller who carried a forked hazel stick and talked about water like it had a memory. And the well was on a 44-square-foot lot between 2 buildings. And the people of Milford could not look at a thing that small and see a thing that large. Vera closed the first notebook. She opened the 9th, the last one. The entries near the end were dated in January of 1923. Thaddeus's handwriting had gotten shakier. The lines wandered on the page, but the measurements were still precise. January 15th, 1923. Flow rate 3.5 gallons per minute. Unchanged after 40 years. Temperature 51 degrees. Unchanged. I am 76 years old. I will not see 80. Vera is 17 now, working in Chicago. I have written to her. If she comes back to Milford, she will find this. If she does not come back, then the well will keep rising and nobody will know what they are walking past every day. The final entry was dated January 28th, 1923, 2 weeks before he died. I have told this town for 40 years that they are drinking bad water. I have shown them test results. I have given them samples. They do not listen because I am a douser, and they are modern people with modern ideas about what is possible. But the ground does not care about their ideas. The ground has been here longer than any of us. The ground has better water than anything they will ever buy in a bottle from a man who drills to 80 feet and calls it deep. I have gone to 271. I have gone through the shale to the old limestone. I have found water that has been rising in the dark for 10,000 years. And I am leaving it to the only person who ever understood that depth is not the same as distance. Depth is patience. Depth is knowing that the best things are buried, and you have to be willing to dig. Vera will understand, or she will not. But the water will keep rising either way. Vera sat on the stone step in the underground chamber, and she read the final entry twice. She closed the notebook. She put it back in the tin box with the others. She stood up. She walked over to the hand pump. She worked the handle. It was stiff at first, then it loosened. Water came up through the casing from 271 feet down. It poured out of the spout into the stone basin below the pump. Clear water. Cold water. Water that smelled like nothing and tasted like everything that was clean and old and patient in the ground beneath Indiana. Vera cupped her hands under the flow. She drank, and she understood. She slept the first night on the stone floor of the pump house, with her coat rolled under her head. It was cold. She did not care. The pump dripped once every 11 seconds, and she counted the drips until she fell asleep, because each one was proof that 271 feet below her in the dark in a formation laid down before anything on this continent had a name, clean water was rising under its own pressure to meet her. She spent the first week learning the well. She pumped it. She measured the flow with a tin bucket and Thaddeus's stopwatch that she found in the tin box beneath the notebooks. The well produced 3.5 gallons a minute. Steady. Without dropping. No matter how long she pumped. She measured the temperature with the thermometer from the tin box. 51 degrees Fahrenheit. Summer and winter, Thaddeus's notebook said. It never varied. She tasted the water every morning. It tasted the same every morning. Sweet. Cold. Mineral. Clean. She ate what she could afford. A sack of oats from the feed store next door. Eggs from a farm woman who set up a stand at the corner on Saturday mornings and sold them for 6 cents a dozen. A slab of bacon that she cooked in strips on a small sheet iron stove she found in the pump house that Thaddeus must have used for the same purpose. She lost weight she did not have to lose, but she was not idle. Every day that she could work, she worked. She read the notebooks, all 9 of them, cover to cover. She memorized the measurements, the depths, the flow rates, the mineral content. She cross-referenced Thaddeus's notes with the town records at the county clerk's office. She made a list of every well in Milford. Who drilled it, how deep it went, what the water tasted like. Most of the wells in town were shallow, 50 feet, 80 feet. They pulled water that was heavy with iron and sulfur. The water tasted of rotten eggs and rust. It stained laundry brown. It ruined kettles. It was drinkable, technically, but nobody drank it willingly. The town of Milford drank coffee and beer, and when they could afford it, bottled water shipped in from mineral springs at French Lick, 22 miles to the west, and from the shelves of the grocery stores in the back room of the general store, and the glass front icebox at Morrison's Cafe on the east side of the square. They bought bottles labeled Caldwell's Crystal Springs Mineral Tonic. Pure spring water from the limestone aquifers of southern Indiana. Bottled at the source for your health and refreshment. Vera stood in Morrison's Cafe on a Thursday morning in her second week in Milford, and she read the label on a bottle of Caldwell's water. She read the claim about limestone aquifers. She read the promise about purity. She read the price. 15 cents a bottle. Then she walked 3 blocks to the Caldwell Bottling Works on Depot Street. She stood across the street where she could see the loading dock and the workers rolling barrels out to the delivery wagons. She watched for an hour. Then she walked to the town hall. She asked to see the water department records. The clerk, a bored young man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, showed her the files. The town of Milford had one municipal well. It was located on 3rd Street behind the fire station. It had been drilled in 1903 to a depth of 80 feet. It supplied water to the fire station, the town hall, and by private contract to 3 businesses on Depot Street, including the Caldwell Bottling Works. Vera walked to the fire station. She asked the fire chief if she could taste the water from the municipal well. He looked at her like she had asked to taste kerosene, but he shrugged and filled a tin cup from the pump in the corner of the garage bay and handed it to her. She drank. The water tasted like iron. It tasted like sulfur. It tasted like the water from every shallow well in Orange County that stopped at the shale and never went deeper, because going deeper was hard, and nobody believed there was anything better down there anyway. Vera handed the cup back to the fire chief. She walked back to the pump house on the 44-square-foot lot between 2 buildings. She sat on the stone step in the underground chamber. She opened the 9th notebook. She read Thaddeus's final entry again. They do not listen because I am a dowser, and they are modern people with modern ideas about what is possible. But the ground does not care about their ideas. She understood now. Harrison Caldwell had been selling water from the municipal well for 20 years. He had been bottling water that tasted like iron and sulfur and calling it Crystal Springs Mineral Tonic from the limestone aquifers. He had been selling it for 15 cents a bottle to people in 3 counties who did not know any better. And he had been making a fortune doing it, and Thaddeus had known. Thaddeus had known for 40 years. But Thaddeus was a dowser who talked to the ground and carried a hazel stick and drilled wells by hand in places nobody else thought to look. And nobody listened to dowsers. Not when there was money to be made selling bad water to people who could not tell the difference. Vera closed the notebook. She sat in the dark stone chamber and listened to the pump drip, once every 11 seconds, like a heartbeat, like the pulse of something old and patient rising through 271 feet of limestone in the dark beneath the town that had laughed at her in the courthouse and was still laughing because they did not know what they were walking past every day. But they would. The first ally came in May. Her name was Dorothea Morrison, and she was a widow of 64 who ran a small cafe on the east side of the square. She had known Thaddeus. She had drunk his water for 20 years. She walked to the pump house on a Tuesday morning with a plate of biscuits wrapped in a cloth, and she stood at the gate and looked at Vera and said, "He told me once that if he ever had the chance to teach somebody what he knew, he would die happy." "Did he teach you?" "He left me notebooks," Vera said. Mrs. Morrison nodded. "That is better than teaching. Teaching walks out the door. Notebooks stay." She sold Vera coffee at her cafe at cost. She let her use the cafe's stove on Sunday afternoons when the cafe was closed so Vera could heat water for a bath in the tin tub she found in the feed store. She told the women of her church that the girl in the pump house was Thaddeus's kin and doing honest work. And within a week, Vera had a donated mattress, a proper quilt, 3 chairs nobody needed, and a kerosene lamp with a good wick. "A town will surprise you," Mrs. Morrison said, "if you let it see what you are doing and you do not beg." Vera asked her why she was helping. Mrs. Morrison looked at her for a long time before she answered. "I had a daughter," she said. "Her name was Margaret. She died in 1910. Typhoid. The doctor said it came from the water. We were drinking from the town well then. Same well that feeds half of Depot Street now. Thaddeus came to the house after the funeral. He did not say anything about Margaret. He just gave me a jar of water from his well and said I should drink it instead. I have been drinking it ever since, 13 years. I have not been sick one day. She paused. Your uncle knew what was under this town. He knew it was killing people. And nobody would listen to him because he was a douser. So he just kept giving away good water and hoping that someday somebody would pay attention. I think he was waiting for you. The second ally came in June. His name was Dr. Leopold Hayes, and he was a chemistry professor at the State College in Bloomington. He drove down to Milford in a Ford sedan on a Friday afternoon, and he stood in the alley between the two buildings and looked at the pump house and looked at Vera and said, "You are not Thaddeus. No, sir," Vera said. Thaddeus was my uncle. He wrote to me twice. Dr. Hayes said. I never answered him. I should have. He took his hat off and held it in both hands and looked for a moment like a much older man. May I see the well? He spent the whole afternoon in the pump house. He took 6 water samples in glass bottles that he had brought with him in a leather case. He measured the flow. He read 2 of the notebooks. He left at dusk, and he came back 3 weeks later with a younger man from the college geology department and a truck full of equipment. The 2 of them spent 4 days running tests in the pump house and in the alley. At the end of the 4th day, Dr. Hayes sat on the stone step where Vera had sat the night she arrived. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had just finished a job he should have done years ago and was relieved to have it done and ashamed that it had taken so long. Miss Merrick, he said, your uncle drilled by hand in 1883 directly into one of the finest artesian formations in the Midwest. The water in this well is, by every standard our laboratory can measure, superior to the water being sold commercially by the major bottling operations in this state. He knew. He knew for 40 years, and he could not get anyone to listen. Dr. Hayes put his hat back on. I am sorry, he said. Vera looked at him. He found somebody who listened, she said. He found me. Dr. Hayes stood. He picked up his leather case. He walked to the gate. Then he stopped and turned back. What are you gonna do with it? He said. Vera told him. She told him the plan she had been writing in the back of the 9th notebook for 3 weeks in pencil, in the margins beside Thaddeus's last entries. Dr. Hayes listened. When she finished, he nodded once. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. That is the laboratory certificate of analysis for your water. You will need it. He got in his Ford and drove back to Bloomington. Vera opened the paper. It was typed on university letterhead. It listed mineral content. Bacterial count dissolved solids. pH balance. At the bottom was a stamped certification that the water sample from the Merrick well on Depot Street in Milford, Indiana, met or exceeded all state and federal standards for potable water and was suitable for commercial bottling and sale. Vera folded the certificate. She put it in the tin box with the notebooks. She sat on the stone step, and she listened to the pump drip, and she thought about Harrison Caldwell. He came to the pump house in July. He had not come sooner because he had not believed he needed to. He had waited for her to run out of money and food and patience. And when she did not, he came in person on a hot Wednesday afternoon in his brown suit with his gold watch chain. He stood at the gate of the lot with his foreman at his shoulder. and he looked at the pump house the way a man looks at a dog that has bitten him. "I made you a $10 offer," he said. "I remember. I will make you a $50 offer today. $50 cash for a lot. The county assessed at 3. Take it, girl. I am being patient with you." Vera looked at him. She looked at his gold watch chain. She looked at the back wall of his bottling works, red brick, 4 feet from where she was standing, behind which 20 years of bottles labeled Caldwell's Crystal Springs Mineral Tonic had been filled from the municipal pump on 3rd Street, which drew from 80 feet down through iron-heavy shale and tasted faintly of rust. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I know where your water comes from. I know it comes from the town pump. I know it does not come from any spring. I have the flow tests. I have the Indiana Geological Survey letter from 1919. I have Dr. Leopold Hayes from the State College, who just spent 4 days running laboratory tests on this water. And I have a certificate of analysis that says the water from this well is superior to anything being sold in this state." She paused. "I am going to bottle this water. I am going to sell it. And when I do, the people of this county are going to taste what real mineral water is. And they are going to stop buying yours." Harrison Caldwell's face did something Vera had seen before in the courtroom. The same sequence of expressions, but in reverse. Certainty to amusement, to dismissal. Now, running backward through dismissal to uncertainty to a kind of gray dawning understanding. He had come to buy a patch of weeds from a girl. He was standing in the doorway of a competitor. "You cannot bottle water on 44 square feet," he said. "I do not need to bottle it here," Vera said. "I need to pump it here. I have already been offered space at the feed store next door. I have been offered Mrs. Morrison's brother's empty garage on Elm Street. I only need the water, and the water is on this lot." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "I will offer you $100. No. I will offer you $200. No. Girl," he said, "you do not understand what you are turning down." "I understand exactly what I am turning down," Vera said. "I am turning down the last offer you will ever make me, because you will not make another one. Because by next summer, every store in this county will be selling Merrick water, and yours will be sitting on the shelf next to it, and the customers will taste the difference." She stepped closer to the gate, close enough that he could see her face clearly. "You could have paid my uncle for the rights to this well for 40 years, she said. "He would have made you a fair deal. You laughed at him. You laughed at me in the courtroom in April. And now you are standing in an alley trying to buy a 44 square foot lot from a 17-year-old girl. And you are going to walk out of this alley with nothing." Caldwell stood there for a long time. His foreman had already taken a step back. The foreman knew when a fight was over, even if his boss did not. "Your uncle was a fool," Caldwell said. But his voice had gone flat and tired. "My uncle was the most patient man who ever lived," Vera said. "There is a difference." Harrison Caldwell turned and walked out of the alley. His foreman followed. Vera watched them go. She did not move until they turned the corner onto Depot Street and disappeared. Then she sat down on the stone step in the pump house, and she put her head in her hands, and she shook for 5 minutes, because she had just told the richest man in Orange County that she was going to destroy his business. And she was 17 years old. and she weighed 116 pounds, and she had $12 to her name. But the water was still rising, 271 feet down, in the dark, in the old limestone, rising at 3.5 gallons a minute, 51 degrees, constant, unchanged after 40 years. And Thaddeus had left her the notebooks, and the bottle, and the map, and the one piece of advice that mattered. Do not let Caldwell on that land for any price. She had not let him on the land, and she was not going to. Not for $50, not for $200, not ever. Vera stood up. She walked to the pump. She worked the handle. Water poured into the basin. She cupped her hands and drank. The water tasted like patience, like depth, like the slow, ancient weight of time pressing down on limestone in the dark until something clean rose up. She had work to do. The young man who came to the pump house on the first Thursday in May did not knock. He stood at the gate with a crate of empty glass bottles balanced on his shoulder, and he watched Vera work the pump for 3 full minutes before he said anything. His name was Ambrose Whitman. He was 22 years old. He was the son of Thomas Whitman, who owned the feed store on the east side of the lot. Ambrose had studied engineering for 1 year at the State College in Bloomington before his father took a fall from a wagon in the winter of 1921 and broke his hip badly enough that someone had to come home and run the business. Ambrose had come home. He had been running the feed store for 2 years, and he had been watching the girl in the pump house for 3 weeks. He had watched her measure the flow from the well with a tin bucket and a stopwatch. He had watched her take water samples in glass jars and label them with the date and time in neat handwriting on strips of paper. He had watched her sit on the stone step with the notebooks open in her lap and her lips moving silently as she read. He had watched her walk to town hall and the county clerk's office and the library. He had watched her eat oats for breakfast and eggs for dinner and get thinner every week. And he had watched Harrison Caldwell come to the gate in July and leave 15 minutes later with his face the color of old paper. Ambrose set the crate down on the ground outside the gate. "Those are Crown bottles," he said, "half-pint size. My father ordered 200 of them last year for a customer who never picked them up. They have been sitting in the back room ever since. You can have them if you want them." Vera stopped pumping. She looked at him. She looked at the crate. She did not say anything. "I have 3 more crates inside," Ambrose said. 800 bottles total. And I have space in the back room, 20 feet by 30 feet. Windows on the north side for light. A door to the alley for loading. No rent for the first 6 months if you bottle there. After that, we can work something out." "Why?" Vera said. Ambrose picked up the crate again. He shifted it on his shoulder. "Because I have been listening to you pump that well for 3 weeks, he said. 3.5 gallons a minute. 51 degrees constant temperature. I read engineering tables for a year in college. I know what an artesian well is. I know what your uncle drilled into. And I know that if you are going to bottle 800 units, you are going to need help and space and equipment that you do not have." He paused. "And because Harrison Caldwell is my father's biggest customer," he said, "he buys 300 pounds of grain a month for his horses. And I watched him walk out of this alley in July looking like someone just told him his business was finished. Which means you told him something he did not want to hear. which means I want to know what you are planning." Vera wiped her hands on her apron. She walked to the gate. She looked Ambrose Whitman in the face. He had gray eyes and hands that were scarred across the knuckles from loading feed sacks, and a way of standing that suggested he was used to carrying weight. "If I bottle water in your back room," she said, "Caldwell will stop buying grain from your father." "Probably," Ambrose said. "Your father will lose 300 pounds of business a month." "Probably. And you are offering me space anyway." Ambrose shifted the crate again. "My father has been selling feed in this town for 30 years, he said. "We will survive losing one customer, especially if that customer has been selling bad water to half the county and calling it mineral tonic." He met her eyes. "Your uncle gave my mother water from this well when I was born," he said. "I came early, January of 1901. Cold winter. The midwife said my mother needed clean water for the first week, or I would not make it. Thaddeus Merrick brought a crate of jars to our house and told my father to boil nothing. Just give her the water from the jars. My mother drank it. I am still here." He set the crate down again. "So yes," he said, "I am offering you space anyway." Vera looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the gate. "Bring the bottles inside," she said. They spent the rest of May setting up the bottling operation in the back room of the feed store. Ambrose cleared the space. He built shelves along the walls from scrap lumber. He installed a work table with a zinc top that could be scrubbed clean. He ran a water line from the pump house through a hole he drilled in the shared wall between the feed store and the lot. 20 feet of iron pipe fitted with a valve so Vera could control the flow. Vera designed the labels. She wrote the text herself in pencil on butcher paper until she had the words right. Then she took the design to the print shop on Main Street and paid $1.50 to have 200 labels printed on gummed paper. Merrick Artesian Water, bottled at the source from a 271-foot artesian well drawing from the Ordovician limestone formation. Certified pure by the Indiana Geological Survey. Available at select grocers. The printer, an old man named Howell who wore an ink-stained apron and a permanent squint, looked at the copy and then looked at Vera. "You are Thaddeus's niece," he said. "Yes, sir." He knew about water, Howell said. Nobody believed him, but he knew. He printed the labels. He knocked 25 cents off the price. Vera and Ambrose bottled the first batch on the last Saturday in May. They worked from dawn until past dark. Vera pumped the water from the well through the pipe into a tin reservoir that Ambrose had salvaged from a broken water heater. From the reservoir, the water flowed through a cloth filter into the bottles. Vera filled. Ambrose corked. Vera labeled. Ambrose packed them into wooden crates padded with straw. By midnight, they had filled and labeled 140 bottles. Vera's hands were cramped. Her back ached. She sat on the floor of the back room with her shoulders against the wall and looked at the crates stacked by the door. Ambrose sat down beside her. He had taken off his jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled up. His hands were raw from working the cork press. "When do you deliver?" he said. "Monday," Vera said. "I have 3 grocers who agreed to take them on consignment. Morrison's General Store, Elkhart Grocery, and Hadley's Market in Powley. How much are you charging 10 cents a bottle?" Ambrose was quiet for a moment. "Caldwell charges 15, he said. I know, Vera said, but my water is better, and I am not Harrison Caldwell. I do not have 20 years of customers who buy out of habit. I have to give them a reason to try something new. 10 cents is that reason. Ambrose nodded. He looked at the crates. You did the math, he said. I did the math, Vera said. 10 cents a bottle, minus 2 cents for the bottle and cork and label, minus 1 cent for my time. That leaves 7 cents margin. 140 bottles is $9.80 profit. If I can sell 300 bottles a month, I can pay you rent and buy food and save enough to drill a second well by next summer. If you can sell them. I can sell them, Vera said. She delivered the first bottles on Monday morning. She loaded the crates into a wheelbarrow and pushed them 6 blocks to Morrison's general store on the square. The owner, a man named Frank Morrison, who was Dorothea Morrison's nephew, took 2 crates, 24 bottles. He put them in the icebox next to the Caldwell bottles. Try to sell them by the end of the week, he said. If they move, I will take more. Vera delivered the second batch to Elkhart Grocery. The owner there was less enthusiastic. He took 1 crate, 12 bottles. He put them on a back shelf. The third grocer in Powley did not take any. He looked at Vera and looked at the bottles and said he had an exclusive contract with Caldwell and could not stock competing brands. Vera pushed the wheelbarrow back to Milford with 4 crates still loaded. 48 bottles. She stored them in the pump house. She sat on the stone step, and she did the math again. 36 bottles placed. At 10 cents each, that was $3.60 gross. Minus costs, that was $2.52 profit. It was not enough, but it was a start. The bottles sold. Not fast, but they sold. By the end of the first week, Morrison's had sold 8 bottles. Elkhart had sold 3. Frank Morrison ordered 2 more crates. Vera bottled them on Saturday. She delivered them on Monday. By the end of June, she had sold 112 bottles, 72 in Milford, 40 in the surrounding towns. She was making $7 a week. It was enough to buy food and pay Ambrose a small rent and save a little. But it was not enough to survive what happened in July. The well ran dry on a Tuesday. Vera discovered it in the morning when she went to pump water for the day's bottling. She worked the handle. Nothing came up. She worked it again. Still nothing. She climbed down into the pump house. She checked the valves. She checked the pipe. Everything was intact. The water had simply stopped flowing. Vera sat on the stone step and felt something cold settle in her chest. She had read Thaddeus's notebooks cover to cover. She knew that artesian wells could fail. The pressure could drop. The aquifer could shift. The casing could collapse. A well that had flowed for 40 years could stop in a single day. She walked to the feed store. Ambrose was unloading a wagon of grain sacks. She told him about the well. He stopped unloading. He looked at her. When did it stop? Sometime last night, Vera said. It was flowing yesterday evening. This morning, nothing. Ambrose wiped his hands on his pants. He walked with her back to the pump house. He worked the handle himself. Nothing. He knelt down and put his ear to the stone cap of the well. He listened. I can hear water, he said, deep down. But it is not rising. Can we fix it? I do not know. Ambrose said. "We need to find out what is blocking it." They spent the rest of Tuesday trying to diagnose the problem. Ambrose lowered a weighted line down the casing. It went down 200 feet and stopped. Something was blocking the well at 200 feet, 71 feet above the aquifer. Vera read through Thaddeus's notebooks looking for references to blockages. She found 3 entries. In each case, Thaddeus had cleared the blockage by lowering a tool on a cable and breaking up whatever debris had fallen into the casing. Clay, stones, once a dead raccoon that had somehow gotten into an unsealed well shaft. "They need to go down," Vera said. Ambrose looked at the well. He looked at Vera. "That is 200 feet, he said. "We would need a winch. A cable strong enough to hold a man. A harness. And someone willing to go down into a hole the width of a stovepipe with 200 feet of nothing underneath." Vera met his eyes. "We have a winch at the feed store," she said. "We have cable. I can make a harness from rope. And I will go down." Ambrose stared at her. "You are serious? Do you have a better idea?" He did not. They built the rig on Wednesday. Ambrose brought the winch from the feed store. A heavy iron drum with a crank handle used for lifting feed sacks to the loft. They bolted it to a wooden frame above the well cap. Vera made a harness from half-inch hemp rope following a diagram she found in one of Thaddeus's notebooks. A seat sling with loops for her legs and a chest strap to keep her upright. Ambrose tested the rig with a 100-pound sack of grain. The winch held. The cable paid out smooth. They pulled the sack back up. The system worked. On Thursday morning, Vera put on the harness. Ambrose had argued with her for an hour the night before. He said he should be the one to go down. He was stronger. He weighed more. The harness would hold him better. Vera said no. The well was hers. The risk was hers. And she was smaller. She would fit in the casing easier. Ambrose gave up arguing, but his hands shook when he checked the knots on her harness. "If the cable jams," he said, "or if you get stuck, you yell and I pull you up. You understand?" Vera nodded. Ambrose cranked the winch. Vera sat in the harness with her feet hanging into the well opening. The stone cap had been removed. Below her was darkness and the smell of deep water and the faint sound of dripping somewhere far below. She took a breath. Ambrose lowered her down. The descent took 20 minutes. The casing was tight. Vera's shoulders brushed the iron walls. The darkness was complete. She had a kerosene lantern tied to her belt, but the flame guttered in the still air and gave almost no light. She went down by feel, counting the feet by the marks Ambrose had tied in the cable every 10 feet. At 190 feet, her feet touched something solid. "Stop," she called up. The cable stopped. Vera hung in the harness and felt below her with her boots. Not stone, not iron. Something soft. Clay. Someone had dumped clay into the well. A lot of it. Enough to plug the casing completely at 200 feet. Vera pulled the small crowbar she had tied to her belt. She worked it into the clay. She pried. Chunks broke loose and fell. She could hear them splash in water far below. She worked for 30 minutes. Her arms ached. Sweat ran down her face despite the cold. The clay was packed hard, but it was breaking up. She called up to Ambrose. He lowered her another 5 feet. She kept prying. More clay fell away. And then suddenly, the entire plug gave way beneath her. She dropped 3 feet before the cable caught. Clay and debris rushed past her in the darkness. She heard it hit water below with a sound like thunder in a barrel. The well began to fill. Vera felt the water rising around her boots. Cold water. Fast. She yelled for Ambrose to pull her up. He cranked the winch. The cable went taut. Vera rose through the casing with water following her up. By the time she reached the surface, the well was flowing again. Water poured from the pump spout into the basin. 3.5 gallons a minute. 51 degrees. Exactly as it had been before. Ambrose pulled her out of the well and set her on the ground. She was covered in clay and soaked to the waist and shaking. "Who did this?" Ambrose said. Vera did not answer immediately. She sat on the stone step and caught her breath. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something she had found in the clay at 200 feet. A tobacco tin. Flat. Round. The kind that sold for a nickel at every general store in the county. The label was still visible. Red Indian plug cut. Harrison Caldwell's foreman chewed Red Indian. Vera had seen the tin in his hand when Caldwell came to the gate in July. Caldwell did this, Vera said. She stood up. She was not shaking anymore. Ambrose looked at the tin. He looked at her face. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep working," Vera said. "And I'm going to make sure everyone in this county knows that Harrison Caldwell tried to destroy my well because he is afraid of what I'm selling." She walked to the pump. She worked the handle. Water poured out. Clean and cold and rising from 271 feet down. Just like it had for 40 years. Before some man with a tobacco tin decided fear was a good enough reason to sabotage a 17-year-old girl's livelihood. The well was flowing again. But the damage was done. Vera had lost 3 days of production. 3 days of sales. And Harrison Caldwell now knew that she was not going to quit, which meant he was going to try something else. The lawsuit came in August. Vera was served with papers on a Friday afternoon. A deputy from the county sheriff's office brought them to the pump house. He handed her a folded document and a summons to appear in court on September 15th. The document was a complaint filed by Harrison Caldwell against Vera Merrick for unlawful appropriation of shared water resources. The legal theory was something called the common enemy doctrine. Caldwell's lawyer argued that groundwater was a shared resource, that any landowner whose property sat above an aquifer had equal rights to that water. That Vera's claim to exclusive use of water from the well on her 44-square-foot lot was invalid because the water originated from a formation that extended beneath multiple properties, including Caldwell's bottling works. The complaint asked the court to declare that Caldwell had equal rights to water from the Ordovician aquifer beneath Milford, and that Vera should be enjoined from commercial use of the water until a fair sharing arrangement could be established. In plain language, it meant that if Caldwell won, Vera would have to share her well with the man who had tried to destroy it. Vera read the complaint twice. Then she walked to the county law library and spent the next week reading everything she could find about water rights in Indiana. The law was complicated, old, full of contradictions. Some cases said that landowners owned the water beneath their land absolutely. Other cases said that groundwater was a shared resource that no one could claim exclusively. The common enemy doctrine had been used in drainage disputes, in cases where one landowner's well had lowered the water table for neighboring wells. But Vera could not find a single case where someone had successfully claimed shared rights to an artesian well on someone else's property. She made notes. She filled a notebook with citations and case summaries. And she found something else. In the deed records at the county clerk's office, she found a document dated May 15th, 1887. A water rights deed, filed by Thaddeus Merrick. The deed was a single page, handwritten in Thaddeus's careful script, witnessed by the county clerk and stamped with an official seal. Be it known that Thaddeus Merrick, having purchased on May 3, 1883, the property located on Depot Street in the town of Milford, Orange County, Indiana, dimensions 60 feet by 60 feet, does hereby claim and reserve exclusive rights to all water arising from depths greater than 200 feet below the surface of said property in perpetuity, regardless of any future sale or division of the surface land. Vera read the deed 3 times. Then she read the property records. The original lot that Thaddeus had purchased in 1883 had been 60 feet by 60 feet. In 1903, 20 years later, 80% of the surface land had been sold. Half to Harrison Caldwell's father for expansion of the bottling works, half to Thomas Whitman's father for expansion of the feed store. Thaddeus had kept only the center 44 square feet, but the water rights deed predated the sale by 16 years. It covered the original 60 by 60 boundary, and it specifically reserved rights to water below 200 feet, regardless of what happened to the surface land, which meant that Thaddeus had protected the deep water under the entire original parcel, including the portions that were now owned by Caldwell and Whitman. The well at 271 feet was protected, and nobody could touch it. Vera made a copy of the deed. She filed a response to Caldwell's lawsuit herself because she could not afford a lawyer. She cited the 1887 water rights deed. She argued that the deed gave her exclusive rights to all water below 200 feet within the original 60 by 60 foot boundary. She requested that the court dismiss Caldwell's complaint. She filed the response on September 1st. 2 weeks before the hearing, Harrison Caldwell's lawyer filed an objection. He argued that the water rights deed was invalid because it attempted to sever subsurface rights from surface property in a way that was not recognized under Indiana law in 1887. He argued that even if the deed was valid, it only applied to the 44 square feet that Thaddeus still owned in 1887, not to the portions sold in 1903. The hearing was set for September 15th at 10 in the morning. Judge William Porter presiding. Vera woke up at dawn on the 15th. She put on the same gray dress she had worn to the probate hearing in April. She walked to the courthouse. The courtroom was fuller than it had been in April. Word had spread. Half the town wanted to see what would happen when the girl who inherited a hole in the ground went up against Harrison Caldwell in court. Caldwell sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a man from Indianapolis in a suit that probably cost more than Vera had earned in her entire life. Vera sat at the defendant's table alone. She had the 1887 deed. She had Thaddeus's notebooks. She had the laboratory certificate from Dr. Hayes. She had a legal argument that she had written herself on 10 pages of lined paper and pencil. Judge Porter entered. Everyone stood. The judge sat. Everyone sat. The hearing began. Caldwell's lawyer went first. He spoke for 30 minutes. He talked about the common enemy doctrine. He talked about shared aquifers and reasonable use and the danger of allowing one landowner to monopolize a public resource. He made it sound like Vera was trying to steal water from the entire town. Then it was Vera's turn. She stood. She walked to the front of the courtroom. She placed the 1887 deed on the judge's bench. "Your Honor," she said, "this is a water rights deed filed by my uncle Thaddeus Merrick in 1887. It reserves exclusive rights to all water below 200 feet on the original property boundaries. Those boundaries were 60 feet by 60 feet. In 1903, my uncle sold 80% of the surface land, but the deed explicitly states that the water rights apply regardless of future sales. The well in question is at 271 feet. It draws from the Ordovician Aquifer. No other well in this county reaches that formation. The water is not shared because nobody else has drilled deep enough to reach it." She paused. "Mr. Caldwell's well is at 80 feet. It draws from a completely different formation. He has no more claim to the water at 271 feet than he has to the water in the Ohio River." Caldwell's lawyer stood up. He objected. He said Vera was not qualified to testify about geological formations. He said she needed an expert witness. Judge Porter looked at Vera. "Do you have an expert witness, Miss Merrick?" Vera nodded. "I do, Your Honor. Dr. Leopold Hayes from the State College in Bloomington. He has submitted a written affidavit describing the geological separation between the shallow wells in Milford and the deep Ordovician formation." She handed the affidavit to the clerk. The clerk handed it to the judge. Judge Porter read it. His face did not change. Caldwell's lawyer argued for another 20 minutes. He tried to poke holes in the deed. He tried to argue that water rights could not be reserved separately from surface rights. He tried to argue that even if they could, the deed only applied to a portion of the aquifer directly beneath the 44 square feet. Thaddeus still owned not the entire original 60 by 60. Vera waited until he finished. Then she stood again. "Your Honor," she said, "may I ask Mr. Caldwell a question?" The judge looked at her, then at Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Porter said, "do you consent to answer questions from Miss Merrick?" Caldwell's lawyer started to object. Caldwell waved him off. "I will answer," Caldwell said. He stood. He looked at Vera. There was something in his face that had not been there in July. Not quite respect. Not quite fear. Something in between. Vera picked up one of Thaddeus's notebooks. She opened it to a page she had marked. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "in 1920 you placed an advertisement in the Paoli Republican newspaper. The advertisement said, and I quote, Caldwell's Crystal Springs Mineral Tonic, pure spring water from the deep limestone aquifers of southern Indiana, bottled at the source for your health and refreshment." She looked up at him. "Is that correct?" "Yes," Caldwell said. "And where is your water actually sourced from the municipal well on 3rd Street? And how deep is that well?" 80 feet, Caldwell said. His voice had gone flat. Vera closed the notebook. So when you advertised deep limestone aquifers, she said, you were referring to an 80-foot well in shale. And when you claimed to bottle at the source, you were actually bottling from the town pump. Is that a fair summary? Caldwell did not answer. Your Honor, Vera said, Mr. Caldwell has been selling water from a shallow, contaminated well and calling it mineral tonic for 20 years. He has been lying to his customers. And now that someone is offering real mineral water from a real deep aquifer, he is trying to use the courts to shut down his competition. She set the notebook down. The 1887 deed is valid. My uncle knew exactly what he was doing when he filed it. He was protecting the deep water from people who would claim it without doing the work to reach it. He drilled to 271 feet by hand over 9 months. Nobody else in this county has ever gone that deep. Mr. Caldwell drills to 80 feet and expects the law to give him rights to water that is 200 feet below where he ever bothered to look. She turned to face Caldwell directly. The water is mine because my uncle earned it and because the law says so. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Porter looked at the deed. He looked at Dr. Hayes's affidavit. He looked at Caldwell. He looked at Vera. Then he picked up his gavel. I will issue a ruling by the end of the week, he said. This hearing is adjourned. The ruling came on September 22nd, 7 days after the hearing. Vera received it by mail. A single page on court letterhead. The court finds that the 1887 water rights deed is valid and enforceable. The deed clearly reserves subsurface water rights, independent of surface ownership. The plaintiff has failed to demonstrate any legal basis for shared access to water arising from depths below 200 feet on the original property boundaries. The complaint is dismissed. Vera read it twice. Then she walked to Morrison's cafe and showed it to Dorothea Morrison. Mrs. Morrison read it. Then she hugged Vera hard enough that Vera could barely breathe. You won, Mrs. Morrison said. Vera folded the ruling and put it in her pocket. I won, she said. But winning in court did not mean winning in town. The news of the ruling spread fast. By the end of September, everyone in Milford knew that the girl in the pump house had beaten Harrison Caldwell in court, and the town split down the middle. Half the town sided with Vera. The church ladies, the farmers who remembered Thaddeus, the people who had been drinking Caldwell's water for 20 years and were starting to wonder if they had been lied to. They bought Vera's water. They told their neighbors to buy it. They talked about it at Morrison's cafe and at the feed store and in the square. The other half sided with Caldwell. His employees, the businesses that depended on his trade, the men who had known him for 30 years and could not believe that he would lie about something as basic as water. They boycotted Vera's water. They pressured the grocers who carried it. They spread rumors that her well was contaminated, that she was using town water and rebottling it, that she was a fraud just like her uncle had been. Vera kept bottling. 300 bottles a week in September, 400 in October. She hired 2 women from Mrs. Morrison's church to help with the labeling and packing. She rented a second room at the feed store for storage. She bought a used wagon and a tired old horse to make deliveries. Ambrose helped her every evening after the feed store closed. He worked the bottling line. He repaired equipment. He built crates and loaded wagons. And slowly, carefully, something between them began to shift. It started with shared work, then shared meals. Vera would bring bread and cheese from the cafe, and they would eat sitting on the loading dock behind the feed store, watching the sun go down over Depot Street. Ambrose would talk about engineering, about the semester at college he had loved and left, about designs he sketched in the margins of feed store ledgers, flywheels and gear ratios and better ways to build a pump. Vera would talk about water, about Thaddeus, about the notebooks and what they meant, about the way the town worked and the way it could work if people just paid attention to what was under their feet instead of what was easiest. They did not talk about Harrison Caldwell. They did not need to. They both knew that the war was not over, that winning in court had only made Caldwell angrier, that men like him did not lose gracefully. In late October, Vera proposed the blind taste test. She and Ambrose were sitting on the loading dock. The air had turned cold. The first frost had come the week before, and the trees on the square were going orange and red. "The county fair is in 3 weeks," Vera said. "First Saturday in November. I want to set up a booth." Ambrose looked at her. "What kind of booth?" "A taste test," Vera said. 2 waters, no labels. People taste both and vote for which one they prefer. At the end of the day, we reveal which is which. You are going to publicly challenge Caldwell's water. I am going to let his water challenge itself," Vera said. "All I have to do is let people taste the truth." Ambrose was quiet for a long time. He will not like that he said, "I know." He will try to stop you. Let him try. Ambrose looked at her. There was something in his face that Vera had not seen before. Not quite admiration, not quite fear. Something deeper. "You are sure about this?" "I am sure," Vera said. "I have been drinking this water for 5 months. I have been selling it for 4. People who try it buy it again. People who do not try it keep buying Caldwell's because it is what they know. The only way to change that is to make them taste the difference." She stood up. "Will you help me?" Ambrose stood. He held out his hand. She took it. His hand was warm, calloused from work, steady. "Yes," he said. "I will help you." They built the booth on the Wednesday before the fair. A simple table with a cloth cover, 2 pitchers, 2 stacks of tin cups, a ballot box for votes. They set it up in the agriculture pavilion between the livestock judging ring and the home canning displays. On Thursday, Vera filled the pitchers, one with water from her well, one with water from a bottle of Caldwell's Crystal Springs mineral tonic that she bought at the general store. She labeled the pitchers A and B. She made 50 ballots, simple cards that said, "Which water do you prefer? Circle 1, A or B." On Friday evening, she and Ambrose loaded the booth components into the wagon. Ambrose drove. Vera sat beside him. The fairgrounds were 3 miles south of town. The road was rutted. The wagon creaked. The old horse pulled steady. They reached the fairgrounds just before dusk. They unloaded the booth and set everything up. The pitchers, the cups, the ballot box. Vera stood back and looked at it. "This is going to work," she said. Ambrose did not answer. He was looking toward the road. A wagon was coming up the drive to the fairgrounds. 2 men on the bench. Even in the fading light, Vera could see the shape of Harrison Caldwell in the passenger seat. The wagon stopped 50 feet from the pavilion. Caldwell and his foreman climbed down. They walked toward the booth. Slow, deliberate. Vera stepped in front of the table. Ambrose moved beside her. Caldwell stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the booth. He looked at the pitchers and the cups and the ballot box. His face was unreadable. "You are planning a taste test," he said. "I am," Vera said. "At my water's expense, at the truth's expense," Vera said. "People have a right to know what they are drinking." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "You won in court," he said. "You got your ruling. You can sell your water. Why do you need to humiliate me in public?" "I am not trying to humiliate you," Vera said. "I am trying to give people a choice. If your water is as good as you claim, then you have nothing to worry about." Caldwell looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Ambrose. "You are making a mistake, boy," he said. "Your father's business depends on mine." "My father's business depends on the truth," Ambrose said, "and on treating customers with respect. 2 things you stopped doing a long time ago." Caldwell's foreman took a step forward. His hand moved toward his belt. Ambrose did not move. He just stood there, solid. Between Vera and whatever the foreman was planning, Caldwell held up a hand. The foreman stopped. "You will regret this," Caldwell said. "Both of you." He turned and walked back to the wagon. The foreman followed. They climbed up. The wagon turned around and headed back toward town. Vera watched them go. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. But the booth was still standing. The pitchers were still full. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow we let the water speak for itself." Ambrose looked at her. "Are you scared?" Vera thought about it. About Caldwell's face. About the foreman's hand moving toward his belt. About the threat in the air. "Yes," she said. "But I am doing it anyway." They slept that night in the wagon. Ambrose in the bed. Vera wrapped in a blanket on the bench. The fairgrounds were quiet. The moon was 3/4 full. Vera lay awake and listened to the wind in the trees and thought about Thaddeus. He had spent 40 years knowing the truth and being ignored. 40 years drilling wells and giving away water and trying to convince a town that what they were drinking was killing them. And tomorrow she was going to finish what he started, not with a lawsuit, not with an argument, with 50 people tasting 2 waters and choosing which one was real. She closed her eyes. She thought about the pump house, about the water rising 271 feet through the dark, about patience, about depth, about the slow ancient weight of limestone pressing down until something clean came up. The water had been rising for 40 years. It would keep rising tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until someone finally listened. Vera slept. The county fair opened at 8 in the morning on the first Saturday in November. By the time the sun cleared the trees on the eastern edge of the fairgrounds, 200 people had already walked past Vera's booth in the agriculture pavilion. Most of them kept walking. Vera stood behind the table with the 2 pitchers in front of her. A and B, no labels, no indication which was which. Ambrose stood beside her. They had agreed that morning not to push, not to call out to people, just to be there, available, and to let anyone who was curious enough to stop make their own choice. The first person who stopped was a farmer named Eli Hadley from outside Powley. He was 70 years old. He had known Thaddeus. He looked at the pictures and looked at Vera and said, "Your uncle gave me water when my well went dry in the drought of '06. I never forgot it." He tasted both waters. He took his time. He rinsed the cup between tastings the way Vera had instructed. He tasted again. Then he circled A on the ballot and dropped it in the box. A was Vera's water. The second person was a woman Vera did not know. She tasted both. She made a face when she tasted B. She circled A without hesitation. By noon, Vera had served 43 people. 38 had chosen A. 4 had chosen B. 1 had said they tasted the same. The crowd at the booth was growing. Word was spreading through the fairgrounds. People were coming to see what the girl from the pump house was doing. Some came because they were curious. Some came because they had heard about the lawsuit. Some came because Harrison Caldwell was walking the fairgrounds with his foreman, and people wanted to see what would happen when he reached the booth. Caldwell arrived at 1:30 in the afternoon. The booth was surrounded by people. 20 or 30 crowded around the table, waiting their turn to taste. Caldwell pushed through the crowd. His foreman followed. They stopped at the front of the table. Caldwell looked at the pictures. He looked at the ballot box. He looked at Vera. "Which one is mine?" he said. Vera met his eyes. "I cannot tell you that," she said. "The whole point is that people taste without knowing. At the end of the day, I will reveal which is which. If you would like to participate, you can taste and vote like everyone else." Caldwell's face went red. "This is a setup," he said. "You are trying to embarrass me." "I am trying to let people taste the truth," Vera said. "If your water is good, it will speak for itself." One of the men in the crowd, someone Vera did not recognize, called out, "Go on, Caldwell. Taste them. Show us your water is as good as you claim." Caldwell looked at the man. He looked at the crowd. He was trapped. If he refused to taste, he looked afraid. If he tasted and his water lost, he looked like a fraud. He picked up a cup. He filled it from pitcher B. He drank. His face did not change. Then he filled a cup from pitcher A. He drank. And this time his face did something Vera had never seen before. Something like recognition. Something like grief. He set the cup down. He did not take a ballot. He turned and walked away through the crowd. His foreman followed. Someone in the crowd said he did not vote. Someone else said he did not need to. You saw his face when he tasted A. By 4 o'clock, Vera had served 96 people. 78 had chosen A. 14 had chosen B. 4 had said they could not tell the difference. At 5 o'clock, Vera closed the booth. She counted the ballots. Final tally: 103 served. 84 votes for A. 15 votes for B. 4 no preference. She stood on a chair. The crowd that had gathered around the booth had swelled to over 100 people. Vera raised her voice. "Thank you all for participating," she said. "The results are clear. 84 people preferred water A. 15 preferred water B. Water A is from the Merrick Well on Depot Street, 271 feet deep. Drawing from the Ordovician limestone formation. Water B is Caldwell's Crystal Springs Mineral Tonic from the Municipal Well on 3rd Street, 80 feet deep. She paused. You have all tasted the difference. Now you can decide for yourselves what you want to drink. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then the whole crowd. Not everyone. Some people walked away. Some looked angry. But enough people clapped that Vera felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since April. They believed her. They had tasted the proof. And they believed her. Ambrose helped her load the booth back into the wagon. They drove home in the dark. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing that needed to be said. The water had spoken. The truth had won. But the real test came 2 weeks later. The first case of typhoid was reported on November 15th. A child in a family on the east side of town. High fever. Nausea. The doctor diagnosed it quickly. He reported it to the county health department. By November 20th, there were 6 cases. By November 25th, there were 14. 3 people died. An infant, an elderly man, a woman in her 30s. The county health inspector came to Milford on November 27th. He spent 3 days testing water sources. On November 30th, he issued his report. The municipal well on 3rd Street was contaminated. A break in the sewer line 200 feet from the well had allowed waste to seep into the groundwater. The contamination had likely been present for months. Everyone who had been drinking water from the municipal system, or from businesses supplied by the municipal system, was at risk. The health department ordered the municipal well shut down immediately. All businesses using municipal water were ordered to close until they could secure an alternate supply. Harrison Caldwell's bottling works shut down on December 1st. The town of Milford had no safe water, except for one well. Vera woke on the morning of December 2nd to find a line of people stretching from the pump house gate down the alley and around the corner onto Depot Street. 40 people, 50, maybe more, all holding buckets and jars and bottles. She walked to the gate. The first person in line was a woman she did not know. The woman was holding a crying baby. "Please," the woman said, "my baby needs clean water. I will pay whatever you ask." Vera looked at the line. She looked at the crying baby. She thought about Dorothea Morrison's daughter, dead from typhoid in 1910 from bad water. She thought about what Thaddeus would do. She opened the gate. "No charge," she said. "Families drink for free. Bring what you need." The woman stared at her. "Free, free," Vera said. She spent the next 12 hours pumping water. Person after person. Family after family. She filled buckets and jars and bottles. She worked the pump until her arms felt like they would fall off. Ambrose came at noon and spelled her for an hour so she could eat. Then she went back to pumping. By nightfall, she had given away more than 200 gallons of water. Every family in the line. Not a single person paid. Vera did not ask them to. Mrs. Morrison came to the pump house that evening with a pot of stew and a loaf of bread. She found Vera sitting on the stone step. with her head in her hands. "You gave it all away," Mrs. Morrison said. Vera looked up. "Yes. You could have charged. You could have made a fortune. I could have," Vera said. "But then I would be Harrison Caldwell, selling water to desperate people because I can, because they have no choice." She stood up. "Thaddeus drilled this well 40 years ago because he knew the town was drinking bad water. He spent 40 years trying to get people to listen. And when they did not listen, he just kept giving away good water. For free. Because he believed water was a right, not a commodity." Vera looked at Mrs. Morrison. "I am not going to charge families for survival. I will charge businesses. I will charge people who can afford it. But I will not charge a mother with a sick baby." Mrs. Morrison set the pot of stew on the step. She hugged Vera. "Your uncle would be proud," she said. The epidemic lasted 3 weeks. In that time, Vera gave away more than 1,000 gallons of water. She worked 18-hour days. She slept 4 hours a night on the floor of the pump house. Ambrose organized a rotation of volunteers from the church to help pump and distribute. Dr. Hayes came down from Bloomington with emergency supplies and water testing kits. Mrs. Morrison coordinated deliveries to families who were too sick to come to the pump house. By December 20th, the epidemic was over. 19 cases total. 4 deaths. The sewer line had been repaired. The municipal well had been cleaned and tested. The health department declared it safe again. But the damage to Harrison Caldwell was permanent. His bottling works remained closed. His customers had learned the truth, that his Crystal Springs mineral tonic came from the same contaminated municipal well that had caused the epidemic, that he had been lying to them for 20 years, that while they were dying he had kept selling water he knew was dangerous. The lawsuits started in January. Families of the people who had died. Customers who had been drinking his water for years. By February, the Caldwell Bottling Works was bankrupt. By March, it was closed for good. Harrison Caldwell came to the pump house on the last day of March. It was a Thursday, late afternoon. The air smelled like wet earth and early spring. Vera was in the pump house cleaning the filter screen when she heard the gate open. She looked up. Caldwell stood in the doorway. He was alone. No foreman, no lawyer, no gold watch chain. He looked older than he had in November, thinner. His suit hung loose on his frame. "Miss Merrick," he said. Vera set down the filter screen. She stood up. "Mr. Caldwell." He looked around the pump house, at the stone walls, at the pump, at the shelf with the tin box and the notebooks. "May I come in?" he said. Vera hesitated. Then she nodded. Caldwell walked down the stone steps. He looked at the pump. He put his hand on the iron handle. "I came to tell you that you won," he said. "My business is finished. The bank foreclosed last week. I am selling the building to pay debts. I will have nothing left." He paused. "You destroyed me." Vera met his eyes. "I did not destroy you," she said. "You destroyed yourself. You sold bad water and called it good. You lied to your customers for 20 years. I did not make you do that. I just made it impossible for you to keep doing it." Caldwell's hand tightened on the pump handle. "Do you know why I fought you so hard?" he said. "Because you were afraid of losing money. Caldwell shook his head. "Because my wife died," he said. Vera did not say anything. Her name was Margaret Caldwell continued. "We married in 1908. She got pregnant in 1909. The pregnancy was difficult. She was sick the whole time. In February of 1910, she went into labor early. The baby came 2 months too soon. A boy. He lived for 6 hours. Caldwell's voice had gone flat. Margaret died 3 days later. Childbed fever. The doctor said her body had been weakened, that something in her system had made her vulnerable to infection. He asked what she had been drinking. I told him water from my bottling works, water from the municipal well. He looked at Vera. Your uncle came to my house after the funeral. He did not say he was sorry. He just told me that if I had been using deep well water instead of municipal water, my wife might still be alive. That the iron and bacteria in shallow water can weaken a pregnant woman. That he had been trying to tell people for years, but nobody would listen. Caldwell's hand dropped from the pump handle. I told him to get out. I told him he was a fraud and a charlatan and that he did not know what he was talking about. And then I spent the next 13 years trying to prove he was wrong, trying to convince myself that the water did not matter, that Margaret died because of bad luck, not because of me. He looked at the pump. But it did matter, he said. And she died because I was too proud to listen. And then when you came to town with your uncle's notebooks and his laboratory certificates and his deep well water, I could not admit it, because admitting it would mean admitting I killed her. Vera stood very still. Mr. Caldwell, she said quietly, you did not kill your wife. I sold her poisoned water, Caldwell said. I sold poisoned water to half this county. 4 people died last month from the same water I have been selling for 20 years. I did that. Not you, me. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small leather journal. He handed it to Vera. These are my business records, he said. Every sale. Every customer, every bottle I sold from 1903 to 1923. I want you to have them, so you know who I lied to, so you can warn them if they are still drinking from shallow wells. Vera took the journal. Why are you giving this to me? Because you were right, Caldwell said, and I was wrong. And because your uncle tried to save my wife, and I would not let him. The least I can do is help you save someone else. He turned to leave. Then he stopped. May I have a drink? He said. From your well. I have never tasted it. Vera nodded. She worked the pump. Water poured into the basin. She filled a tin cup and handed it to him. Caldwell drank. Slowly. He closed his eyes. This is what she should have been drinking, he said. He handed the cup back to Vera. He walked up the steps. At the gate, he turned back one more time. Thank you, he said. For what? For being more like your uncle than I ever was. He walked out of the alley. Vera never saw him again. Harrison Caldwell died in the spring of 1920. 28. Pneumonia. He was 47 years old. He left no family, no estate. The notice in the Milford newspaper was 3 sentences long. Vera paid for his funeral. A simple service at the Methodist church. A pine coffin. a plot in the town cemetery next to his wife and the son who had lived 6 hours. Mrs. Morrison asked her why, because forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, Vera said, and because my uncle would have done it. Merrick Artesian Water launched officially in the fall of 1923. The epidemic had been free advertising. Everyone in 3 counties knew about the girl with the deep well who had given away water when the town needed it. Orders came in faster than Vera could fill them. She bottled in the back room of the feed store. She hired 4 women from town to help with labeling and packing. She bought a second wagon and a better horse. By Christmas, she was selling 800 bottles a week. In January of 1924, she opened her first account outside Orange County. A grocer in Bloomington who had heard about her from Dr. Hayes. By March, she had accounts in 5 counties. By summer, she was shipping to Louisville. In 1925, she drilled a second well. Same location, same depth. 271 feet into the Ordovician limestone. The second well flowed at 3.5 gallons a minute, exactly the same as the first. The water tasted identical. Vera cried when the water came up, not from relief, from proof. Proof that Thaddeus had been right, that the deep aquifer was real and sustainable, and exactly what he had said it was for 40 years. She married Ambrose Whitman in 1928. A small ceremony at Mrs. Morrison's cafe. No church, no formal wedding. Just 50 people who had known her and helped her and believed in her when the rest of the town was laughing. Ambrose had proposed in the pump house on a Sunday evening in March. They were bottling a late batch. He was corking. She was labeling. He stopped working and looked at her and said, "I want to offer you a partnership." "We already have a partnership," Vera said. "Not in the business," Ambrose said. "In everything else." He pulled a ring from his pocket. "Plain silver band, no stone. I cannot afford much," he said. "But I can promise you 40 years of working beside you. And I can promise that I will never ask you to be less than you are." Vera looked at the ring. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. They were married a month later. They had 2 daughters. The first in 1930, the second in 1933. They named the first one Samantha after Thaddeus. The second one, Margaret, after the woman whose death had taught Vera that water was not just chemistry. It was consequence. The company grew. Through the Depression, through the war, through every decade that followed. Vera ran the chemistry and the quality control. Ambrose ran the engineering and production. They built a proper bottling facility in 1935. Automated lines, commercial pumps, distribution networks that reached 8 states by 1940. The offer came in February of 1940. A letter from the War Department, typed on official letterhead, delivered by registered mail. The letter explained that the government was conducting a survey of natural resources in preparation for potential military mobilization, that they had identified rare earth mineral deposits in the limestone formations beneath southern Indiana. That preliminary surveys indicated significant deposits directly beneath the Merrick property. The letter offered $100,000 for mineral rights. The rights would allow the government to drill to 400 feet, below the aquifer, through the water-bearing formation, to extract minerals considered vital to national defense. The letter was polite, professional. It made no threats. It simply explained that the needs of the nation might require access to resources beneath private land, and that cooperation would be appreciated. Vera read the letter 3 times. Then she showed it to Ambrose. $100,000, he said. That is more money than we will make in 10 years. I know, Vera said. That is enough to secure the business forever, to pay for the girls' education, to set up their futures. I know. Ambrose looked at her. But you are not going to take it. No, Vera said. I am not. Why not? She walked to the shelf in the pump house. She picked up the 9th notebook. She opened it to the final entry. Thaddeus's last words. She read them aloud. I have gone to 271 feet. I have gone through the shale to the old limestone. I have found water that has been rising in the dark for 10,000 years. Depth is patience. Depth is knowing that the best things are buried, and you have to be willing to dig. She closed the notebook. If we let them drill through the aquifer, she said, the water will be gone. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not for years. But eventually, the pressure will drop. The formation will collapse. And our grandchildren will have nothing. She looked at Ambrose. Thaddeus drilled this well because he was thinking about people 50 years in the future. People he would never meet. People who would drink this water after he was dead. If I sell the mineral rights for money, we need today, I am saying that money matters more than water. That our generation matters more than the next one. She set the notebook back on the shelf. I will not do that. The water stays, Ambrose nodded slowly. Then we tell them no, he said. Vera wrote the response herself. 1 page, typed on company letterhead. Dear Sirs, thank you for your offer regarding mineral rights on the Merrick property. I must respectfully decline. The aquifer beneath this land has been producing clean water for 57 years. With proper management, it will continue producing for another 200. The water is more valuable than any mineral beneath it. The water is renewable. The water is irreplaceable. The answer is no. Sincerely, Vera Merrick. She mailed the letter in March. She never received a response. The War Department found their rare earth minerals somewhere else. The years passed. The daughters grew up. Samantha studied chemistry at Indiana University. Margaret studied business at Purdue. They both came back to Milford after graduation. They both joined the company. By 1960, they were running daily operations. By 1965, Vera had stepped back to an advisory role. In 1968, Samantha's daughter enrolled at Purdue. Her name was Rebecca. She studied hydrogeology. She was the first woman in the program. She graduated in 1972 with honors. Her thesis was titled, Mapping the Ordovician Aquifer System of Southern Indiana. The thesis took 3 years to complete. Rebecca surveyed every well in 12 counties. She measured depths. She tested water samples. She mapped the underground formations with a precision that would have made Thaddeus weep with pride. Her conclusion: the Ordovician Aquifer beneath southern Indiana was one of the finest freshwater formations in the Midwest. It extended beneath most of Orange, Lawrence, and Washington counties. It was accessible at depths between 250 and 300 feet. And only 4 wells in the entire region had ever reached it. Thaddeus's original well from 1883 Vera's second well from 1925. A commercial well at French Lick drilled in 1930. And one accidental well near Bedford drilled by an oil company in 1955 that had missed the oil and hit water instead. 4 wells in 90 years, because nobody else had been willing to go deep enough. Rebecca presented her thesis to the State Geological Society in 1973. She submitted it to the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. She argued that the Ordovician Aquifer should be classified as a protected resource. That deep drilling permits should require proof that shallow alternatives had been exhausted, that the state should map and monitor the formation to ensure sustainability for future generations. In 1974, the state agreed. They designated the Ordovician Aquifer as a strategic water resource. They established regulations for deep well drilling, and they placed a historical marker at the original Merrick lot on Depot Street. The ceremony was scheduled for April 20th, a Saturday, spring. Vera woke that morning in the house she and Ambrose had built on the edge of town in 1946. Ambrose had died 3 years earlier, heart failure, quiet, in his sleep. The way he had lived. She dressed in a simple gray suit. She walked to town. The streets of Milford had changed. Paved now. Streetlights, cars instead of wagons. But the lot was still there. 44 square feet between 2 buildings. The pump house still standing. The well still flowing. The ceremony started at 10. 200 people gathered in the alley. State officials, newspaper reporters, people from town who remembered Thaddeus, people from town who remembered the epidemic, people from town who remembered laughing in the courthouse in 1923. 3. When a 17-year-old girl inherited a hole in the ground. The historical marker was granite, 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide. Bronze plaque. On this site in 1883, Thaddeus Merrick drilled a 271-foot artesian well, reaching the Ordovician limestone aquifer. His work demonstrated the value of deep groundwater resources and established the foundation for modern hydrogeological science in Indiana. The well continues to flow at its original rate after 91 years. Dedicated April 20th, 1974. The state geologist gave a speech about aquifer conservation. The mayor gave a speech about town history. Rebecca gave a speech about her grandmother's work and her great-great-uncle's vision. Then they asked Vera to speak. She walked to the front of the crowd, 68 years old, white hair, hands scarred from 40 years of working pumps and bottles and equipment. She stood in front of the marker and looked at the faces. Some she knew. Some she did not. Some were descendants of people who had laughed at her. Some were descendants of people who had helped her. All of them were here because of water, because of one man's patience, because of one well. She spoke without notes. In 1923, she said, Judge William Porter read a will in the probate court 3 blocks from here. The will said I had inherited 44 square feet of land. A man in the courtroom laughed and said I had inherited a hole in the ground. He was right. I did inherit a hole in the ground. But what he did not understand was that a hole in the ground is the most valuable thing you can own. If it goes deep enough. If it reaches something true. She paused. My Uncle Thaddeus spent 40 years being right and being ignored. He knew what was under this town. He knew the water in the shallow wells was bad. He knew the deep aquifer was clean. He tried to tell people. They did not listen. Because he was a dowser. Because he talked to the ground. Because the truth he was telling was inconvenient. She looked at the marker, but the truth did not care whether people believed it. The water kept rising, 271 feet down, in the dark, under pressure, for 40 years, waiting for someone to break the seal and taste it. She looked back at the crowd. Thaddeus taught me that patience is not passive. Patience is not waiting. Patience is water rising in a casing for 40 years while the world walks past and calls you a fool. Patience is knowing that the ground does not care about opinions. The ground only cares about depth, about whether you are willing to go through the easy layers to the hard ones, about whether you are willing to drill through the shale that stops everyone else because you believe something better is underneath. Her voice got quieter. Everyone listening to this has 44 square feet. Something small that the world does not value. Something people laugh at when your name is called. A talent nobody measures with a ruler. A gift nobody sees. A thing rising in the dark under pressure that nobody has tasted yet. She looked directly at the crowd. The question is not whether it is there. The question is whether you are willing to dig, whether you are willing to go deep when everyone else stops at shallow, whether you are willing to wait 40 years for the water to prove you right. She picked up a tin cup from the table beside the marker. She walked to the pump house. She worked the handle. Water poured into the basin. She filled the cup. She drank. The water tasted the same as it had in 1923. Sweet, cold, mineral, clean. Rising from 271 feet down through limestone that had been laid down when this continent was ocean floor. Rising the same as it had for 91 years. As it would keep rising for another 100, another 200. As long as someone protected it, as long as someone remembered that depth matters more than distance, that patience is power, that the best things are buried. Vera set down the cup. She walked back to the crowd. After the ceremony, a man in an expensive suit approached her. He introduced himself as a representative of a beverage company. He said his company was interested in acquiring Merrick Artesian Water. He mentioned a figure. $8 million, cash, immediate. For the business, the wells, the water rights, everything. Vera looked at him. No, she said. The man blinked. I have not finished explaining the offer, he said. You do not need to, Vera said. The answer is no. This water is not for sale. Not for 8 million. Not for any amount. My uncle drilled this well in 1883 because he was thinking about 1974. I am thinking about 2074. The water stays in the family. The water stays protected. The answer is no. She walked away. She walked to the pump house. She sat on the stone step where she had sat 51 years earlier when she first drank from the sealed bottle Thaddeus had left for her. The stone was cool. The chamber smelled like iron and water and time. She closed her eyes. She could hear the pump dripping, once every 11 seconds. The same rhythm it had kept for 91 years, the heartbeat of the earth. the pulse of something older than memory. She thought about Thaddeus, about the notebooks, about the 9 months he spent drilling by hand through limestone and shale, about the 40 years he spent being right while the town called him a fool, about the sealed bottle he left on a shelf in the dark with a note that said, "Drink this first." She thought about the courthouse, about the laughter, about Harrison Caldwell's face when he realized the hole in the ground was deeper than he had ever looked. She thought about the epidemic, about the line of people with buckets and jars, about the choice to give it away, about Caldwell's confession, about forgiveness. She thought about Ambrose, about 40 years of working beside someone who never asked her to be less than she was, about daughters and granddaughters, about water rising through generations. She opened her eyes. She looked at the pump, still dripping, still rising, still proving every day that Thaddeus had been right about depth, about patience, about the truth that waits in the dark for someone willing to dig. Vera stood up. She walked to the shelf. She picked up the 9th notebook. She opened it to the final page. Below Thaddeus's last entry, she wrote her own in pencil and small, neat letters. April 20th, 1974. The well flows at 3.5 gallons per minute. 51 degrees. Unchanged after 91 years. The state has placed a marker. The family will protect the water. Thaddeus was right about everything. Depth is patience. Patience is power. The water keeps rising. It always will, as long as someone remembers to go deep. She closed the notebook. She put it back on the shelf with the others. 51 years of her life. 91 years of the well. 4 generations of family. All of it built on 44 square feet, and one man's willingness to drill deeper than anyone else believed was necessary. She walked out of the pump house into the spring sunlight. The crowd from the ceremony had dispersed. The alley was quiet. The town moved around her the way it always had. Cars instead of wagons. Electric lights instead of kerosene. But the ground beneath was the same. The water beneath was the same. Rising. Always rising. In the dark. Under pressure. Waiting for the next person willing to break the seal and taste the truth. Vera walked home through the streets of Milford, past the square where Morrison's Cafe had been, past the corner where the feed store still stood, past the courthouse where a judge had read a will and a room full of people had laughed at a girl who inherited nothing. She walked slowly. Her knees hurt. Her back hurt. She was 68 years old, and she had spent 51 years building something from nothing. From 44 square feet, from one sealed bottle, from 9 notebooks full of measurements that nobody believed until the water proved them true. When she reached her house, she sat on the porch and watched the sun go down over the town. The same sun that had set over the town the day Thaddeus drilled the well. The same sun that would set over the town when her great-great-grandchildren were running the company. The water would still be rising then. 3.5 gallons per minute. 51 degrees, unchanged. Because some things are built to last. Some things are buried deep enough that time cannot touch them. Some things are true enough that patience is the only proof they need. Vera closed her eyes. She listened to the evening, to the sound of the town settling, to the sound of water rising somewhere beneath the street, beneath the buildings, beneath the noise and the hurry and the forgetting, still rising, still waiting, still proving that depth is not the same as distance, that patience is not the same as waiting, that the best things in this world are the things we dig for, the things we protect, the things we leave behind for people we will never meet, who will drink from wells we drilled, and know that we were here, that we went deep, that we believed the ground had better things to give than what was easy to reach. Vera smiled. The water was still rising. It would rise tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until the sun burned out and the continent shifted, and the limestone returned to the ocean it came from. But until then, the water would rise, and someone would drink it, and they would taste what Vera had tasted, what Thaddeus had tasted, what 4 generations had tasted. They would taste patience. They would taste depth. They would taste the truth that waits in the dark for anyone willing to go looking. And they would know that 44 square feet is enough. If you know how to dig, if you know how to wait, if you know that the ground keeps its promises better than any person ever could, the water keeps rising. That is the promise. That is the inheritance. That is what lasts.